Good day, everybody, and welcome to the Coldest Murder, the podcast that we've been doing surrounding the murder of one Carol Ann Doherty, 9-year-old girl who was murdered, raped in a church in Bristol, PA, way back in 1962. It's been a cold case for 62 years. We hope everybody's been following along this series of podcasts as we continue to develop legs to this whole case. With the goal being that we'll be able to solve it through DNA. And on that note, today we have a very special guest. If you saw our last podcast, we talked about the murder in Hazleton, PA, a couple of years after the murder of Carol Ann Doherty. So in 1964, there was a murder of a 9-year-old girl as well. Her name was Marise Chiverella. And that became a cold case for some 58 years until it was recently solved through DNA, where they exhumed the body of the suspect that was identified by DNA. So today, we have a guy who helped solve that case, and it's a pretty amazing story. Eric Schubert joins us. He's 23 years old. He developed the study of DNA and forensic genealogy kind of as a hobby, and he wound up helping the state police in that area solve this case. Eric, thanks for being with us. We really appreciate it. How you doing?
How are you? Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And it's been great to listen to the show that you guys have been putting on. You guys have been putting out some great episodes.
Thank you so much. And we're glad to have you because we mentioned you in our last podcast. And this is a fascinating story. And I thought it would be really entertaining and interesting for the listeners to hear your story on how you got involved in identifying DNA to solve crimes. A pretty amazing story. So let's go back to the start. So I give a foundation. So you have always been curious about this particular science to the point where your parents encouraged you, okay, well, you know, do some work on the ancestry.com for our family. So just tell that story on how you actually got it. You know, most people you're playing with toy trains and you know, Matchbox, and you're into the study of DNA at a very young age.
Yeah, I definitely took a little more of a unique path, that's for sure. I used to be homesick a lot when I was a kid. So, 10, 11, 12 years old. And you're right, I would just be doing what every kid would be doing, just annoying their mother homesick. So she just saw a commercial, and my parents saw a commercial for one of the genealogy websites, DNA websites, and just thought, all right, you're homesick, you love history, you love puzzles, you love mysteries. How about you try and use our family tree as a starting point? How about you start some research? Thinking that I would, get off her tail for a few weeks or a few days, leave her alone. And I mean, the strategy certainly worked, but I would say it backfired a little bit because that was, 12, 13 years ago. So I sort of picked it up and never put it down. It was just something that I thought would take 2 weeks, but I just kept at it. And there I was at 12 years old with my, mother's laptop. So not very high tech at all. And it was just something that I knew I could keep doing and I enjoyed doing. And it sort of just quickly transpired from there.
All right, so the similarities of these cases are pretty amazing in the time scope and the whole thing. You're from Medford, New Jersey, correct? Okay, so you went to school, you went to college, Elizabethtown. Okay, so that's in the area where this crime was committed. Now, this has
Exactly.
been a cold case for a really long time. My connection to this case, of course, is I was kind of personally involved in it because I lived in that town. The murder had happened around the corner from me. It sent shockwaves through the community, especially for a little kid. But you have an interesting story. So that case was kind of lingering around Hazleton, where they couldn't solve the case of the murder of Marise Chiverella. When they found her body, they had no clues, no suspects. What was it about that case that made you interested?
Well, like you said, I was at school at Elizabethtown during that time. So it's about 90 minutes from Hazleton, I would say. And I had just gotten off of solving my first cold case. And I thought, okay, clearly this is a field that's new. This is something that I've demonstrated to myself I can do. And it's also something that law enforcement sort of gave me a crash course in and told me that I'll never forget it verbatim. They sort of said, Eric, there's so many cases out there where they want to do genealogy. Maybe they tried, but we don't know what we're doing. And all it sort of needs is someone like you to just take another look at it, someone, a genealogist, someone just to think outside the box and not internally from a police department. So I really took those words to heart, and I'm sitting here on campus. I literally just Googled cold case, and because I was so close to Hazleton, the first thing that came up was an article, and at that point it probably had to be a year or two old, documenting how PSP was starting to try and use genetic genealogy to solve the Marise Chiverella case. And knowing what I know as a genetic genealogist, I was sort of reading between the lines in the news article, and I was thinking, okay, clearly they are trying, and clearly they are not having much luck. And it has been, a year, 2 years, and they had not published any update. So I think there's an opening here to try and work this case, because I know if they give me this case, I can't guarantee that I can solve it, but I can guarantee I'll at least do better than anything they have right now. And it sounds cocky, but I sort of learned that you had to have that confidence. And I truly believed that. And I wanted them to know that I felt I could aid in this case if they let
You're
me.
talking about the state police that you are
Exactly,
talking about.
CSP.
Okay.
And I wanted them to know that I was confident and I wouldn't be approaching them if I didn't feel that way. So I sort of just said, all right, let me send them an email, just an email that was on the news clipping, and just see what happens. And that's what I did. Very brief email. I just said, hey, I'm 18 years old at the time. I just read about this case. Here's some references. I'm not a random person emailing you. I like to think I know what I'm doing when it comes to this. Clearly, if you're still trying to use genealogy on this case and you're not having any luck, I'd really want to talk to you more about it. And they answered me immediately, very nicely, and just said, thanks so much. We appreciate it. And I thought, oh man, I blew it. I blew it, and they're just putting me in the pile of people who are reaching out about that case. And then about an hour later, I didn't answer. And then about an hour later, they replied again and said, actually, Eric, can we come see you like as soon as possible at Elizabethtown? And I thought, all right, now we might be on to something.
So
You
they
know,
checked you out. Basically, they checked you out. All
Oh,
right,
for
so
sure.
let's reintroduce ourselves. So this is the episode 12 of Coldest Murder. And I'm Mike Missinelli. Vince Mola is on the screen, as you can see him. He joins us from New York, and we're talking to Eric Schubert, who's 23 years old, who volunteers now to help the state police because of his DNA expertise. They blow him off, but then they check you out somehow, and now you're on board. So where did it go from there? Did you provide them some kind of a roadmap to solve this?
I like to keep things simple, and that is my mantra. I say that time and time again. So when they met with me, it was a job interview, like you said, and I came prepared, not too cocky but confident, and I came prepared, basically laying out where I thought they were in the case, and laying out what my first steps would be, and just laying out my background, my law enforcement references that they had already checked into. So I was basically saying, you guys must be advertising about this case in this specific way because you tried this technique and that technique. It didn't work, and you are stuck at this point. And what I didn't know was that I was pretty much spot on, and I was reading back their strategy to them. So I think at that point they sort of they realized that yes, I do want to help, and I do recognize the path that they're on, and I think I can change it. So what I did was they just gave me, as with any case, the DNA match list. So people who publicly upload their DNA to public databases that police can use, which oftentimes are not very sizable in terms of a match you're getting. So the top match was very distant, and that's all I had. And we are talking, a fraction of a cousin, type of deal. It was a very distant match. So they gave me that, and they said, good luck, kid.
Wow, Vince, this is a pretty amazing story already. And we're going to get to the specifics. And it's very complicated stuff for a lot of our listeners and viewers. So we're going to try to get Eric to explain it in layman's terms on how he actually traced this whole thing. So we have a blip on the screen here, Vince, a distant cousin match that it now has to go through several different layers.
Eric, this is a very interesting point that you just made about looking at their methodology, and you had a good idea of what it is. I think for Mike and I, and probably for our audience and most lay people, this an approach and how it's done is very foreign. And so, and when we first started, I thought, oh, there's a map, you get a sample, and it goes to a lab, and that's. But the more I've studied you, the more I'm learning that there's nuance. And I also realized that you have developed your own methodology. For our audience, in a layman's terms, how would you describe whether it be your methodology or your unique selling proposition?
You guys had a great episode, I think, when you were describing last, talking about how this technique works, talking about how it's sort of a weather vane. I've used that term before, and I think it's accurate. It's like a big game of hot and cold, too, is how I describe it. But I think my unique approach, as we'll call it, shall we say, would be that I keep things simple, as I mentioned before. So all I care about is how do I get that DNA number stronger? If a law enforcement agent or detective gives me a DNA match and said, this is the first match, this is the top match that we have in the case, good luck, which is what happened with PSP. All I care about is trying to get that number higher. So I am looking at the simplest, quickest, most effective ways to do that. So that could be, and it varies case by case. So there's so many techniques that I think a lot of genetic genealogists like myself have in their arsenal, and it's sort of on a case by case basis. Determines what ones need to be applied. But you could determine if anyone closely related to that match is an active family historian or genealogist, because if they're interested in genealogy, maybe they've already taken a DNA test, so you don't need to be calling random people or stalking out random people as a law enforcement agency might do to get a DNA sample. Having that honest conversation with someone and saying, hey, we're working on a case, and you would save us about 3 months of time if you just spit in this tube or uploaded your existing DNA test to a public database, you could help solve a case. So I think just trying to not overcomplicate it. But what you're doing is, let's say I have this list, and like with Chiverella, we've been talking about as an example, I started out with a match which was 60 centimorgans, which is like a unit of measurement. Very, very distant. You're working up the family tree, trying to get to that hot area. So I said, okay, we know our guy is Italian. In this family tree, even though it's really distant, there's only one branch of the family that's Italian. So if I go back 3 generations and I call up one of those people in that family tree and say, have you taken a DNA test before? Can you upload it for us? And they do that. My number might now be 300 centimorgans, and I'm very close to solving a case. So it really is just building out the family tree based on the match that you get and asking people for a sample, as opposed to thinking they won't give it. You're not going to get it unless you don't ask. Telling it like it is, so making sure that you're not going off on too many tangents in terms of bad research alleyways that could totally waste you time. So I could go on and on, but it definitely just boils down to, I have this match, who can I ask, or how can I get a sample or more data that will prove that I'm on this sort of right track.
Okay, what is the original sample of the DNA where you're trying to get a match? Are you talking about the DNA from the crime scene that you identified that whoever it is Italian in the DNA that was discovered?
So it works both ways. With this sort of technique and with genetic genealogy, the DNA, like if I'm identifying a John Doe, Jane Doe, if that sort of work is being done by someone, they might have blood or DNA that's been, sequenced and uploaded. But for a criminal case, like for Marise's case, it was the DNA that was left on her blouse by the actor that was then uploaded. So you're sort of like when people take DNA tests trying to, they spit in the tube and try and find their father. This is sort of the exact opposite. You're starting with the evidence or the DNA, and you're trying to figure out who's the one that spit in the tube. Not saying they did, but for that reference point, it's the same thing as, the person who killed Marise Chiverella. His DNA was on her blouse, but we solved it the same way a person spitting in a tube, with the popular genealogy test would be finding a father or that sort of thing. So it's all the same process, but you can apply it and everyone uses it.
Okay, so you do have existing DNA here, and you're trying, obviously, there's no database for the killer. This is why you're going through all the other parameters through the family tree and a whole bit. So, why was the body exhumed of this killer? And of course, we found out that the killer's name was James Paul Forte. That's an Italian name. Um, so why was the body exhumed? Did you need more of his DNA? Because we're relating it now to the Carol Ann Doherty case, where they also have scant DNA, and they're going to have to go through maybe major platforms and planks of this testing that you're talking about to determine even now who that is. So exhuming the body serves what purpose?
Exactly. So exhuming the body, it doesn't have to be done all the time, but in cases where, and this could definitely apply to the Doherty case, depending on if a suspect is identified, it depends on who's still alive that could provide a reference. So when we narrowed in on James Paul Fort and we wanted to see how close we were, we could see it was him if we had a DNA sample from a parent or a child, because that's such a strong result. So if we asked a parent or a child of his to test and it came back, we would know, okay, he's our guy. However, he died at 40, I believe, 41.
38.
Yeah, his parents were deceased and he had no children. So we sort of were narrowed in on him, but we had no DNA reference of him closer than like a half nephew. So all the genealogy work and genetic genealogy work that was done by myself and PSP had to go before a judge to get the exhumation order, to get to dig him up and get his DNA, to then compare it and prove, with all certainty that it was him. So comparing it, like I said, potentially to the Doherty case, if it's a scenario where you're trying to prove that someone did it and they don't have any living family, or they don't have many family around who can test, it might be something that the agency needs to get them exhumed. And especially with a case like this, going back so many years, the agency might want to really show people that it's solved and it's done. And look, we pulled him out of the ground and we have really settled this, that it's done.
Okay, let's relate it now to the Doherty case. They're in a situation now where would exhuming the body help in any way to collect further DNA? Their DNA has been misstored, it's deteriorated. They tried to test it at first, they couldn't come up with anything. And so now they're taking it to another level with a more sophisticated test. And it was mentioned to me that they have some untested DNA that was just overlooked that they can send out here. So what would be the methodology right now?
Well, it sounds like right now, what needs to be done is being done, which is all that evidence that was either potentially overlooked or was tested before, excuse me, is being retested with higher standards and at a higher level. So I think what's being done right now in terms of the lab work is the gold standard. So I think once you get an answer back on that, that will determine whether the approach maybe needs to be changed. But I think the right thing to do is retest the evidence at a proper lab, and that seems like that's what's being done.
So the difference here would be you exhume the body to find Forte's or Fort's DNA. We don't need to find Carol's DNA at this point. I'm just asking that maybe could they possibly find any of the killer's DNA on her body right now?
That's something that it totally varies, and that's why you're right. This is something where when you're trying to ID an actor, like we were with Fort, that's why exhuming is so important. But with the situation and the steps in the process where you're at now with this case, I think the lab work that's being done is sort of really the only thing that should be.
All right, we're talking to Eric Schubert, a 23-year-old wunderkind, sort of, in this area. It's pretty. Your story is pretty amazing at this age, what you've been able to do, and you've even formed your own company called ES Genealogy, where people can give you these kind of cases, and you be the guide for them at a charge, of course. What percentage is there in solving this case? Now, we've done this podcast all leading up to the grand prize, which is that these tests are successful, that they identify who the killer was once and for all, of all the suspects, or even if it's not one of the suspects, which I would find hard to believe, of the three major suspects, or really two, that are here. So, what? Why should we be so optimistic that this can be solved right now?
Well, I will say at first, I'm very eager to hear at further episodes to hear both of your hypothesis when it comes to who you think did this. I've been very invested. I think right now, the Chiverella case was 1964, and that was solved after 58 years. I just read a case today that was solved, I believe, 1958. So these older cases are being solved regardless of DNA storage, regardless of those extenuating circumstances, due to this new technology and the new lab work. So I would say the Caroline Doherty case has a good chance of being solved if that DNA work is viable and that DNA work is uploaded to public genealogy databases. Because with a lot of cases, or I shouldn't say a lot of cases, but with some cases, yes, the DNA could be too degraded and you can't get to that genealogy step. But it sounds like, as we talked about today in the episode, stuff is being retested, especially things that were being overlooked. So it's on the right path, and it's getting tested at a higher level that's been done before. So I think that is really only the barrier to entry here. I think if you can get past that and the DNA is uploaded, then I think it is anybody's game.
I have been told that they have tested and accumulated the DNA of the suspect's relatives. So at this point, that would be the match they're looking for.
So what they would be doing is they would be uploading that DNA to, I was talking with the Chiverella case, how they gave me a match list, and that's sort of all they gave me to start, because that's all I need. They would upload that DNA to a site like that, public DNA databases, where it spits out a list of people who are in some way related to whoever did this, the actor. So it could be, they could upload the DNA, and there could be a DNA match that's 1,000 centimorgans, and it's that person's grandfather is the one who committed the crime, and it takes the genealogist about 45 seconds to figure that out. So sometimes the genealogy work, it can really be quick. So that's why with this case, I think the lab work and the evidence, that's what this is really all hinging on.
All right, one question for me, then I'll turn it over to Vince. Why would this take? We've been told that it could take a year to test this. Why so long? And is that a reasonable window, or could this be solved in less time?
What I would say is the case has certainly been sitting since 1962. So I think if it's a year to test and get some good evidence, I think that's worth it. But all labs work differently is what I would say. But I think what I mentioned earlier is sort of the work that's getting done is the work that needs to be done. So right now, I would be very happy with how the Doherty case is shaping up. That would be my takeaway.
One of the things that we had, I think, was something that made us fear our opportunity to get to a resolution on our case was the constant refrain in the beginning from the people with whom we spoke was that our DNA was terrible, degradation, storage, you name it, the time frame. But Eric, you're giving me more hope today, and I think Mike as well, because as you said, our cases are contemporaneous by 2 years. And how good was the sample of DNA that was used in your case?
That's another great question. I think I hope I am giving you guys some hope here, because I think there definitely is. I was just saying earlier how I saw a case from 59 or 60 today get announced. So these cases are getting solved regardless of that DNA evidence, and that is a common theme lately that I've been seeing. So I think that's something to remain really hopeful about.
The system that you've developed, because I'm thinking about, like, the number of cold cases, and I don't know if I saw it in terms of something about you, but this vast number of cold cases that remain in this country, and the things that you do from an outsider's point of view, it seems like your work is boutique or bespoke. How scalable is your work to apply it to a greater number of cases?
I think that's part of the reason why I love talking about genealogy and genetic genealogy, because I want to try and let people know, like is the case here, how this case can totally be solved, and let people know that there is hope with these cases. I think last I checked, there's only, I shouldn't say only, but there was maybe 100 to 200 people in the world who were, trained genetic genealogists like myself. And that number is growing. So I think it's something that maybe 5 years ago, when I was solving the Chiverella case, it was the Wild West. And some of the methodologies and techniques that I use there, other people have certainly copied and claimed as their own. However, I think that just goes to show that the field is growing and the field is sort of exploding. And I think that's good, because there's going to be more people who are equipped to handle these cases, and they're going to be solved quicker. Hopefully cold cases is going to be a thing of the past, right? And genetic genealogy too, it's being used lately to solve recent type of cases. So I think it's something that it's definitely getting scaled, day by day.
If you need a lawyer to represent your interest in people stealing your work, I know a guy. I got a guy for you. So all right, this is the last question, because we've shaped this podcast so people can form their own opinions. We laid out the evidence and the circumstance, and everybody plays a guessing game here on who did it, or has an instinct on who did it. I don't know how closely you have followed the Carol Ann Doherty case. Have you formed any opinion one way or the other on the highest percentage of who the killer could be?
I think it's going to be an absolutely random person that was on no one's radar, and everyone's going to be surprised.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my
And
God.
what makes you think that?
Just cases I've solved in the past. That's all, but at least in my experience, that's always how it's worked. And there have always been theories on, like, could it be this person or that person? With the Chiverella case, that was the first thing PSP wanted me to do, was eliminate 3 or 4 people that had been talked about for the last 50 years, and I did it in 5 minutes. So certainly that doesn't mean every case is the same, but my opinion, yes, if I had to guess, I think it's someone completely random, and I won't say if, I'll say when it's announced. That would be if I was a betting man, that's what I'd be betting.
Wow.
Wow.
That stunned me a little bit. Vince,
I
did that
know.
stun you?
Okay.
Eric,
Oh my God.
I'm gobsmacked right now. My jaw just got off the floor, and the definitiveness by which you just said that also shook me, because wow, I'm shocked.
Well, that means this
And who knows?
podcast is going to continue for many episodes down the road. Eric, listen, this has been a pleasure. Thank you, Eric Schubert, CS Genealogy. He's formed his own company. This is the science for this guy at such a young age, and he's done so much good, including helping state police solve a cold case that was 58 years old. Amazing work, Eric, and thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate it as well. It's always great to talk with you guys and more about genealogy. You'd think after so many years I'd have a better handle on explaining some of these topics too, but I'll get there one of these days.
No, you did fine. Thank you.
Perfectly. Thank you.
All right,
Eric.
that's Eric Schubert. So Vince, I've got to continue this discussion here.
Wow.
He just dropped a bomb on us. Now there are a lot of people actually have suggested, well, maybe it's somebody random, and we have spent so much time focusing on the suspects because of the connection that they have to the case. It would blow me away if it's some random guy or random person who got away with this without a trace of evidence. So I mean, he's the expert. He's got the instincts for this kind of thing. Um, is it possible?
Uh, you know, man, I didn't think it was possible. I thought it was had possibility, but very narrow. And now I don't like, and I almost feel like with each passing episode, with each bit of because we really learned a lot of stuff together, whether it's from the DA or from DNA experts or genealogists. So I don't know why I'm so shaken right now, but I've invested so much into our suspects that the idea that it could be somebody else is mind blowing.
I think we all have, and anybody who's listened to this podcast has done the same thing. And now there's a curveball thrown in here. So listen, let me
Wow.
tell you where this podcast is right now. Now, we had planned just a couple of more, and then we just play a waiting game with the DNA testing. And I am really trying hard to get the current investigators of this Carol Ann Doherty case to come on this podcast to explain like how they proceeded through this cold case and what led them to this point and where they are now with it. And there's one particular trooper that I've been speaking with, and I'm hoping that he finally consents to come on. If not, there is another person that is involved in investigating this case currently, who hopefully we can get. So I just want to leave people with that. That's where we're trying to go with it. And then there will be one final podcast where we wrap up the whole thing and go over the evidence and step by step when we lay this podcast out, and we'll go over those again. So you guys see what I want people to do now. If you're invested in this case and you're listening to the podcast, I would love to hear your opinion on who you think the killer was. And we will announce those results on the last two podcasts that we're planning to do, because I'm just curious to know. This has been a classic whodunit, and people have followed along with us, and we have our own opinion, and everybody else has their own opinion. There was just a curveball thrown into it, which it's been communicated to me by a couple people. Maybe it was somebody that you're not even looking at, and Eric Schubert just confirmed that. So I'd be curious to know what the listener and the viewer's opinion is. And you can, there's a reply, there's a way for you to communicate with us at right below the podcast that you visibly see on YouTube, right, Vince?
That's right. In fact, I would say one, engage the podcast. It really helps so that other people can also maybe it goes on to their algorithm. Two, when you like and subscribe, it helps you to stay connected. Three, comment. We have built this community of people to comment, and you're awesome. We really appreciate you. Don't stop. And because also we're learning from you, we're communicating back, whether it's there or in other ways. So yeah, that thing. And I think people after this episode are they're going to be as shaken as we are, Mike. And I think they're also now going to let out some of their own latent thoughts about, I had this thought, and they'll fill in the blank.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would love to hear what people think. I'll reply to every comment you put out there. That's what I love to do. The communication with the people that are invested, like we are, in watching and listening to this podcast. So, yeah, I would love to take a survey on who you think it is at this point, and then we're trying like heck to get the main investigator, current state police investigator, on this podcast to talk about it. And he doesn't have to give up trade secrets. Like, we just want to know. It's interesting to me that when you're given a cold case, and the one particular trooper that I'm speaking of got this case in 2017 and has been working on it for the last several years. So I think it'd be beneficial and interesting to the listener. How do you proceed when you get a cold case? What's your first move? How long do you stay with it? How do you investigate it? Things like that. We've tried to do our investigation. Listen, we're amateurs at this whole thing. We're not a police detective. So the research that I've done is all through just digging as a journalist. But those guys do it at a higher level. So hopefully we'll have him on, or somebody who's also investigating this case for the state police and the DA's office. So Vince, great episode. And
Awesome.
everybody, thank you for listening and watching. We've got 2 more to go on this. I frankly didn't know how long. We played this by ear to keep going and going and going and see how many layers we could add. So we're going to wind up, having maybe 14 podcasts on this. The coldest murder, the murder of 9-year-old Carolyn Doherty in a church in Bristol. And I think that the more we go on with this, the more people I hear from, and I know you do too, who were around then and remember the case and are so happy that we're doing this and trying to solve this case, or at least trying to bring closure to it. So, Vince, thank you. I'm Mike
Thank you.
Missinelli. You've been listening to the Coldest Murder. 2 more left. Hang with us. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.